Hi everyone and welcome to my review of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction in 1994. Here it is on Blu-ray, and yes, a rewatch tonight, of course. The next in my Tarantino, director series, and of course the most popular, overall Tarantino film. It's pretty much in the top 10, top 25 at least. Most popular films of all time. IMDb, of course, it's in the top 10, I believe. Yes, it is, and with an 8.9. This film, it was actually, I believe it was the first Tarantino that I saw. It's probably like 13. It's either this or Reservoir. I think it is this that I first saw, because I don't quite remember, if it was that or Reservoir, but because I remember watching them a couple of times again in the same year, rewatching them because I loved them so much. And yeah, my mind's kind of blurred on that, but I think it was probably this one that I watched first. Heard so many things about it. I watched it, and there's no point beating around the bush. This is considered one of the greatest films of all time, and I agree. I've kind of hinted it many times, but wow, this film, it's a masterpiece. It's just one of the best films ever made. It's a contender for his best. I understand people say that. Personally, I actually think he's made at least one film that's better than this, and I prefer. I'll get to that. And yes, but this one, it is cinematic perfection. Most people by now have probably seen, Pulp Fiction. It's kind of a film that you hear about very, very young, and I'm sure probably you check it out and see what it's like. And most people, I've never really met anyone who hates the film if they've seen it. And it's probably one of the films that's very, very hard to hate. I've never really come across it. But yes, basically, if kind of the plot, of course, I can't really explain too much, but yeah, basically, intertwining plots here. Now, the three main kind of, you could say, protagonists, of the film, and we'll get to that. But basically, this film, very, very non-linear, and it's the second Tarantino. Reservoir Dogs for me was just, an absolute masterpiece. Had some, of course, non-linear storytelling. Very, very simple plot here, and it was they're all involved in this kind of one event. This film kind of blows that up. It's kind of more, say, Magnolia, where you've got different, you could say subplots, but intertwined, different characters, a bigger cast, spread out over different, events. And of course, Bruce Willis is in the film. He plays Butch. He's one of the, you could say, the protagonists in the second act of the film. And of course, John Travolta, who is actually my favourite, in the film. Who plays Vincent Vega, who is actually, of course, the brother of Vic Vega, Michael Madsen's character in Reservoir Dogs. And I just love, this is the one that started all the kind of the universe of Tarantino. And of course, many say, that really all of his films are linked. I don't know if I believe every single one of them to be so, but most of them, there's definitely hints in there. But yes, this is great to see this. And of course, it gives you more to think about, kind of connect. But yes, basically, and then of course you've got Samuel Jackson, he plays Jules. He's basically the protagonist, you could say, of the third act. And they're all kind of cross paths. Of course, Vincent and Jules are, kind of partners, and they work for, of course, Marcellus Wallace, played by Ving Rhames, who is a great actor. Just love Ving Rhames. Of course, Mission Impossible, this kind of stuff. And yes, that is the basic plot. There's all these criminals, hitmen, you could say, and there's a boxing event that happens. The plots intertwine, and it's told out of order, non-linear, and it starts, of course, with the famous, opening scene. When I first saw this, there's not much to kind of say that hasn't been said about this. So make it more personal, maybe this one. When I first saw it, I think. I was gripped straight away. More inclined, to Reservoir Dogs, the first sort of scene. Very, very gritty, and you could say minimalist in terms of the shots and everything. It sets you up, and then it just blasts into the credits. And it's just amazing. Everything, the font, the choice of music, and of course the music in this film. The soundtrack. It's so iconic, and it plays a very, very important role, in the film. And for me, it's one of the best soundtracks of all time. I don't think it's the best. Again, Tarantino's soundtrack. There's a couple actually I think is better than this. This is probably his third best soundtrack for me. But it's just amazing. You've got so much, Great, yeah, there's great songs here. You know, and just to listen to this, you know, and I have the CD, and of course I have it on other devices. It's just so good, you know, to listen to this on its own. But like great films, you know, when this song's used, you know, you kind of once you've seen the film, you know, it's that good. You kind of when you hear the song on the radio, or whatever, you know, you kind of just connect it to this, you know, every time. At least I do, and it kind of on its own, it's just great to listen to, and if you've got that connection with it, and the way the songs are used, a genius, you know, in this film, I think, just absolutely wonderful, you know, and of course, Dusty Springfield, you've got, you know, Chuck Berry, who's just, for me, one of the greats of all time. You've got so much great, you know, artists here, and it's just such a cool soundtrack for one of the coolest films of all time, you know, the style to this film, you know, and the substance, you know, this is not a film, you know, it's completely stylish, and there's no, you know, emotion or depth or anything. This film just balances out perfectly. You know, it's stylized. You know, as I've said before, the first three Tarantino films, you could say, are the stylized ones. Then he goes on to kind of ultra stylized, for me anyway. You know, Kill Bill, Django, Inglourious. I'm not saying Death Proof, but it's kind of inclined to that. And then, of course, you know, Hateful Eight is kind of again very, very different. It's took a different direction there. It's much more, well, un-Tarantino, you could say. Going back to maybe Reservoir, you know, kind of one location. But yeah, it's very, very different once again, in the manner he approaches it. But yes, these early ones, they are stylized, and this one is just, you know, everything about the way this film, you know, looks and sounds, it's just perfect. You know, it's genius. Now the script of this film is one of the best in film. You know, I think it's probably his second best script for me. It's just probably one of the 30 best, you know, scripts of all time for me. It's just genius. Not just you know, the actual dialogue, how quotable it is, you know, and how it kind of has a wonderful flow. But it's kind of as well, you know, it's got very, very reflective moments in the script, you know, and just kind of genius ways he brings in, you know, the Bible references and all this kind of stuff to make it more spiritual. That's what gets me every time. You know, I think this is one of the, you know, if people say what's the funniest film of all time, you know, this would be probably in the top 10. You know, I think a lot of the funniest films are not actually comedies, and this one, you know, it's just one of the funniest films. You know, I don't think, you know, of Jules and Vincent as hitmen, you know, because they're so, you know, kind of relaxed and kind of, you know, jokey and everything, and you know, they're hitmen, but they're just, you know, the way that Tarantino does this, all his films really are comedies, you could say, and you know, more than anything, as well as being, you know, references and, you know, homages. They are comedies. This film is just one of the funniest, but the thing is, of course, the characters are so, you know, have so much depth to them, and you know, it's just every time, you know, it always gets me, especially, you know, when it all comes together at the end, and you've got the arc kind of coming to a close, although not really. You know, it's actually quite touching. It really is. It's a spiritual film, you know, and you know, that's what gets me every time. On the surface, it's kind of these references, you know, all these references. It's a comedy, you know, it's kind of a such an entertaining kind of out of order film, but it is very, very deep actually. And you know, the spirituality that's in this film is so well done, and it's just, you know, it's kind of exploring fate, you know, and one's place, and kind of how things, you know, if you make choices, it can just, you know, affect your life for the, you know, and how things turn out, you know, differently based on very, very simple choices, and it's just very, very, you know, moving in the end actually, but also very, very epic. The ending is just epic, you know, and of course that last song, you know, Surf Rider, genius, one of the best endings in cinema. And you know, of course, many people say, you know, this is one of the best films of all time. I think it is. You know, I think you know, it's not quite in my top 10 of all time, but it is. It's in my top 50. You know, I think everything about this film is perfect, you know, and the characters in this film really are the ones, the thing that make it definitely in my top 50 of all time, you know, especially just, you know, all these characters, the way it intertwines, of course, but just how enjoyable they are, you know, the dialogue, performances, how likeable they are, you know, most of them. The pairing of, you know, Samuel Jackson, John Travolta, who, of course, you know, his career kind of came back, you know, with this film, you know, of course, and, you know, just the pairing of these two, it's cinema, you know, it really is. It's so good, it's so enjoyable, you know, and just the banter between them. You know, they're probably, you know, the characters are in the film the most, and you know, it's just brilliant. I think Bruce Willis's character Butch is amazing. You know, he's more of a mysterious character. You know, but I love his whole storyline. You know, and of course he shows up. You know, in the first act of the film, and then he comes into play more. You know, after the hour mark, and it's so amazing. The characters in this film, of course. Mia Wallace, played by Uma Thurman, who is just wonderful, you know, and not her best performance, not quite, but she is amazing in this film. The performance is perfect, you know, just all the right notes, and she's just so, you know, the seduction of it all, you know, with her and John Travolta, it's so enthralling, you know, so compelling. The first hour of this film, you know, probably consistently is just. For me, the best part of the film. You know, it's all perfect. Every shot, every second of this film, I'm obsessed with. But if I was asked, you know, personally, consistently, what is your favourite of the three acts? It'd probably be the first, you know, the first sort of hour and a bit. You know, until of course Bruce Willis comes into it. You know, I love it all, but this is just, I think when it's at its best. You know, and you know, it's just. The use of music here, you know, is at its best. The relationships, probably the dialogue, and just the dance scene is legendary. And of course, you'd have Tarantino, you know, when he was actually making this, dancing just behind, you know, and just to think that, you know, he put so much into this dance scene. It's so much energy. It's hilarious, you know, and it's just cinema. You know, it really is. You know, everything about this film is perfect. You know, and just these characters, you know, of course, as I've said, you know, the things, you know, the thing that really elevates it into such an enjoyable film, and you know, every act, you know, is flawless, as I've said. It's just told in a non-linear way, and you know, in terms of best films, you know, non-linear films, fully non-linear, I would say this is probably in the top 5. You know, I think a couple of examples, you know, that are probably better than this. 2001: Space Odyssey, Once Upon a Time in America. You could say as well, yeah, definitely The Godfather Part 2. There's a couple of examples, but apart from them, you know, maybe one or two other ones. This is up, you know, this is right up in the top. I think it's just wonderful. It never, you know, kind of, there's any moments where it feels like there's no progression though. You know, it's told out of order, but each scene, you know, kind of leads on to the next. You know, and it just with such a momentum to the narratives, you know, you could say all the different, you know, arcs in the film. And when you rewatch it, it's just so much better, you know, to kind of go back and see this unfolding again and kind of piece it together more. It's one of them films, really, you could say that I've seen it over 10 times, but, you know, I don't remember exactly, you know, the exact ordering of the scenes, you know, if I've not seen it for about a year or so. And it's just one of them films, you know, you remember all the scenes, but not quite the ordering of it. And it's just so much fun, you know, to kind of go back and see it. And yeah, it has perfect narrative, perfect characters, you know, and it's so good, you know, this film. There's so many moments throughout this film that I just kind of think, wow, you know, it is just genius. The cinematography, of course, is wonderful. Again, not quite his best cinematography for me. Everything about the way, you know, this film's shot, though, is wonderful. You know, it's got kind of a, you know, dreamlike, fantastical feel the first hour. And then, of course, it becomes more, you know, kind of gritty. You could say more Reservoir Dogs, you know, in terms of the cinematography for the rest of the film, you know. But still, it's got this wonderful feel to it. And it is just one of the best shot films of all time. You know, all the kind of, you know, tropes, the signatures of Tarantino, you know, the trunk shots and all this kind of stuff. It's all here, and it's just wonderful. You know, of course, the editing is perfection, and you know, it's just the way the music is used. It's just epic, wonderful. You know, it's so entertaining, this film, and so masterfully crafted that it's just off the charts, masterpiece. Really, for me, we'll get to it, but of course it gets full marks. I'm not going to flaw this film. For me anyway, there's no flaws whatsoever. But it goes way beyond that, you know, and we'll get to that. But, you know, just every time I see this, it's probably better and better. You know, it's just so good. I always get kind of shivers as well when you've got that kind of tracking shot. Bruce Willis, you know, the way when he goes to get his watch back from his apartment, that is genius. The way that Tarantino kind of maintains the tension there, it never gets broken. You know, someone could jump over the fence or kind of shoot him down at that bit, but you know, it's because it's so tense. You know, you don't see anything other than just behind him. Even when you know you rewatch it, you know, it's just the way it is executed. It's so tense and kind of you know, it just gives me the feels, you know, inside every time. And then of course you've got that massive event there, and it kind of changes everything. And you know, this film, the kind of twists and the way that, you know, it kind of unfolds, once you've seen it, it kind of becomes more tragic. Actually, you know, when you see it, you see how all these lives, you know, the fates of these characters turn out, and you know, of course, the way it kind of ends is kind of again flips that in many ways, without spoiling it, you know, exactly. But yeah, it's such a complex film. You know, this is not just a quotable, you know, entertaining film. It's got so much depth, actually, you know, and just, of course, the script, all the different kind of monologues. Christopher Walken, amazing actor, one of my favourites, and his scene is just amazing. The character of Butch, you know, from that scene, is just given so much, you know, just weight to his storyline. The exposition in this film is genius, you know, and it just has, the dialogue allows, you know, Tarantino allows the film to kind of, you know, it's very, very cinematic, but it feels very, very, you know, you feel relaxed when watching it, you know, at ease. He takes his time with it all, you know, he kind of lets it unfold naturally, although, you know, of course, massive pop culture references, but it's just so natural, the dialogue. You know, it's epic, it's cinematic, you know, it's kind of so meaningful, but it's also very, very relaxed, and that's just how he's written the dialogue, you know, the performances as well, you know, such conviction. Samuel Jackson, probably his best role for me, and yeah, I think it's his best performance. You know, John Travolta, personally for me, has never been better than in this film. You know, everything I've seen him in. You know, and you know, Thurman, not quite her best, but she's perfect. Bruce Willis, probably, yeah, it is his best film that he's been in. Not quite his best performance, but for me, Pulp Fiction is the best, you know, Bruce Willis film. If I was asked that. Even better than Die Hard, Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, all this. Yeah, it's better than that, because this film is in my top 50. You know, and it's just everyone in this film, the cast are just perfect. You know, Ving Rhames as well. The whole kind of as well, the tension rises once again. You know, when you see the whole, you know, the gimp scene, all this bit, you know, in the kind of centerpiece of the film, is so masterful. You know, it's very, very disturbing. This film, you know, at heart it's a comedy, you could say. It's certainly on the surface, but it takes a dark turn. You know, the drug scene as well. But then, you know, later on when you see, you know, the gimp scene, that is very, very disturbing. Of course, Tarantino at moments leaves it to the imagination, you know, of the audience, and what is said there, you know, what is suggested, is more disturbing than actually seeing it, I think, in this occasion. And you know, it's such a, you know, a dark scene, but the way it ends is actually very hopeful, although very, very sad as well. You know, it ends, you know, the film ends on a hopeful note, and it's just, you know, there's not much more to say. This film is genius. One of the best, probably best 30 scripts of all time. You know, I think this is one. You know, it's probably the second best Tarantino script for me, and you know, I think. Cannot wait to review the rest of his films, but Pulp Fiction, you know, rightfully so, regarded as one of the 10 best films, or at least top 25. It's for sure in my top 50. It always has been, and you know, it just every time I see it, you know, it inspires me. It's so entertaining. I just want to watch it again. You know, the Tarantino just draws the viewer in. You know, you have so much compelling characters that are so real. You know, they feel real. They make references throughout the film. You know, they're kind of very obscure at times. You know, all this kind of stuff, but they feel real. He mixes fantasy, definitely, with reality perfectly in this film, because there's moments where, you know, it is kind of very fantastical and very dreamlike. It's very, very gritty and realistic, authentic at the same time. It's a genius film. The way it's shot, edited, the use of music is epic. You know, this film, you know, the soundtrack it's just amazing. You know, everything he'd done in Reservoir Dogs, you know, it's completely knocked, you know, that film out of the park. He bettered in every single way in this film, but it's much more than that, and does not downplay, you know, that masterpiece. But this one is a magnum opus. Of course, it is the same. It's the same, you know, meaning, but you know, of course, if you've seen my channel, my highest rating is a magnum opus, I call, and that is 100% plus, tier S. This film gets my highest rating. It's in my top 50 of all time. It is, you know, one of the very best films ever made. Probably my third favourite, you know, 1994. One of the best years in film, and this is just one of the best of that year. Of the 90s, of all time, you know, Tarantino is a genius, you know, and I understand how people say this is his best. Not quite for me, personally, but wow, this film, you know, it's got everything. You know, it is romantic, seductive. You know, it's the references are so good. It's a comedy, and it's one of the funniest films ever made. You know, of course, it's got so much moving stuff as well. You know, when you look you know, under the surface, it's so enjoyable. It's so epic. You know, it's so effective in the way it's shot. You know, the editing, it's masterful. The direction here is masterful. Genius writing, genius directing. You know, it's just such an ease to it. You know, but it's very, you know, it's very, of course, his own stamp on it. You know, this is just one of the, you know, it's a Tarantino film, of course, when you watch it. And, you know, most people have probably seen this by now, and, you know, it's kind of, I can't really say much more than what has been said. But, you know, other than the fact that I've added, you know, it's a film that what always gets me is the fact that, you know, it is very deep and kind of spiritual, you know, underneath, while it's also, you know, of course, so entertaining, so effective in its comedy. You know, of course, there's some violent scenes. You know, it takes a dark turn, but it is, you know, it's full of hope and kind of reflective moments. And these characters, you know, I just think I could watch them talk all day. You know, this film, it's a bonus that it has one of the best, you know, strongest narratives in film, because this kind of, you know, you could watch this film and just watch just the scenes where they are talking, you know, just talking for 20 minutes or so, and, you know, loads of different pop culture references. You know, I think it's just so well done. You know, that I can just watch this, you know, forever. And you know, the fact that it's got, you know, these arcs throughout the film, which culminate, you know, out of order, of course. There's always a momentum and progression to it. You know, when you see the ending of this film, which of course is not the last, you know, moment in the kind of timeline, you feel kind of satisfied. You feel, you know, like things have come to a close. You know, you kind of, everything wraps up, but you also look back to previous moments, and it's because he structures this in such a way that it can only be called genius. You know, it really is one of the very best films of all time. I absolutely adore this film. You know, it's just a masterpiece. The Blu-ray is actually one of the best, you know, as well. Most Tarantino films look amazing on Blu-ray. You know, and it's just Pulp Fiction, of course, a magnum opus. You know, is it his best? Not for me, personally, but, you know, it's in my top 50, so that kind of, yeah, it says it all, really. He's one of my top 10 directors of all time. Just an absolute genius. Can't wait to see his new film, which is very risky, I must say. You know, I'm not worried about how good it'll be, but, you know, I don't know. I hope he doesn't get loads of backlash again, you know, for certain things. Of course, very you know, risky subject matter there and everything. But yeah, I hope it all goes well, and I will be seeing it. You know, I'll be getting them tickets and seeing it. And yes, you know, Tarantino is just one of the geniuses of cinema for me. You know, of course, he references many different you know, things that came before. But this film is just one of the most unique, creative, engaging, entertaining, and masterfully made films of all time. And it's Pulp Fiction, and it's an absolute perfect piece of cinema. If you've not seen it, go check it out, please. You know, and come back and see, you know, and tell me what you think. But Pulp Fiction is always going to be one of my, you know, very favourite you know, films. Just an absolute magnum opus for me. And yes, next up will be Jackie Brown, and yeah, I'll be buying that on Blu-ray. because I don't currently own that. But yes, basically, cannot wait for that, and the rest of his filmography. And yes, thanks for watching my review of Pulp Fiction.